Hello, everybody. Welcome to AAC in the Cloud 2020. I'm proud to have Lily Huston. She's going to be talking about alternative access beyond physical disabilities. And you will be in Slack 3. Feel free to reach out to questions or without questions, and she'll be happy to answer them maybe at the end. Lily, take it away.
Thanks.
Welcome, everyone. I am so excited to be here to talk about alternative access beyond physical disabilities. There are a lot of reasons to use alternative access methods that aren't so obvious, and I hope you get some good ideas about why and how to implement alternative access methods. This presentation is targeted at professionals, and you'll hear me say student a lot when I'm talking about the AAC user, but I think you'll learn no matter who you are, and I wish I had been able to access this type of presentation when I started using AAC myself and working with my family members. Okay, just one quick piece of housekeeping. I wanted to have a full transcript, but it really wasn't possible, so the slide text is fairly comprehensive, and of course you can try using automatic voice recognition. The PDF should be readable and includes alt text for all images and videos. Because my ability to speak is variable, I have pre-recorded my presentation, and if you have a copy of the PowerPoint, the voice should be available on every slide. I'll answer questions at the end, either typing my answer on the screen so you can see it or using my AAC device. So who am I? I'm an autistic woman. I spent most of my life just retreating when I became nonverbal. In the past 4 years or so, I've tried a number of different types of AAC. I would say I speak verbally about 75% of the time and use some type of AAC the rest. These days, I primarily use Lamp Words for Life and American Sign Language. I'm in the process of acquiring a dedicated device as well, hopefully with Unity or Lamp on it. I attend California State University Northridge as a master's student in the Assistive Technology and Human Services program. It's a really great program, and being fully online, it's really awesome for me with my chronic illnesses. I have a 7-year-old cousin who I introduced to AAC, and you'll hear a bit about her later. Additionally, between my undergrad and grad school, I was a support worker in a group home with 3 nonverbal adults, a foster home with 4 verbal young men, and a paraprofessional in a high school classroom of 9 autistic students, as well as an early elementary life skills classroom. 8 of my high school students were nonverbal and several of my elementary students. All of that information is to say that there are roughly 3 roles in AAC: the user, the family, and the professionals. I've been lucky to be all 3. So if I'm all that, what aren't I? I'm not a speech-language pathologist. This presentation is not reporting the results of some amazing intervention I've implemented, but a proposal for an intervention that I think SLPs and other professionals should consider, based on my experiences in those 3 realms. There are 3 main types of alternative access to AAC, and each one is so complicated there could be multiple full presentations or even full conferences about them. But I want to get through this background bit quickly. The first type of alternative access is partner-assisted scanning. A communication partner scans through each item, whether that be a picture, symbol, a word, or a letter. The communicator responds with yes or no for each item. Switch scanning has a device that scans each item until the user selects a switch. You can have one switch, or there can be 2 switches, one which moves from item into item and the other which selects. There are infinitely many types of switches for every body part and type of movement. In the picture you see Stephen Hawking, who used a switch to access his AAC. Finally, there are eye gaze and head pointing. They're very different than switch-based methods and scanning-based methods because you go to the thing you want directly without scanning through undesired items. I don't have to go next, next, next. Okay, I go straight to the one I want. People often think of eye gaze devices as being this brand new high-tech thing, but a low-tech apparatus can be very effective, and the expensive, fancy eye-tech devices probably aren't accessible for your students who don't have physical disabilities. I will talk more about low-tech eye gaze and head pointing later. So those are the types of alternative access. Who usually uses them? Firstly, someone who cannot isolate a finger. If there's no pointing finger, and that doesn't have to be the pointer finger, it could be a pinky, but if there's no pointing finger, it's going to be hard to use a typical AAC device. And some people can hit with multiple fingers or their whole hand, totally fine. But this person who uses alternative access is going to have mishits. Secondly, someone who can't hit the intended target. This could be someone who has spasticity and misses the device screen or is on and off. It also could be someone who is always a button off or something. And thirdly, there's people with degenerative disabilities. They might be able to activate a touchscreen with their finger now, but we know they won't be able to in the future, and so we train them on eye gaze or scanning. This is often someone with ALS or Rett syndrome. Well, all those people sound like great candidates for alternative access. So that's it? No, that's the whole point of me presenting today. I need to show you that there are people who already belong to these categories but don't seem like they do, and people who don't belong to those categories who still deserve alternative access. I'm going to talk about what kind of people might need alternative access, especially autistic people, and then I'm going to talk about the methods with which you can implement alternative access. I'm also going to talk about what else you might check before you go straight into alternative access. I said there was people that belonged to the aforementioned categories that we were missing or not noticing. So let's look at them again. Cannot isolate a finger. Well, instead of thinking of children or adults or yourself who obviously can't have a finger out, think about people who you try and you just can't get them to put one finger out, or you can only do it if you physically pull their finger into place. Please don't do that. It's dangerous. But also, it might be a clue. There could also be people who point, but they're still always accidentally hitting the other buttons. Their fist, their knuckles, their palm resting and hitting other buttons, and that's frustrating. The second category, cannot hit the intended target. Well, what about someone who seems like they're hitting random buttons? You don't know if they have intention. What if you assumed that they did have intention? What would happen? Maybe they have intention, but they can't get the target. You also might have someone who seems to be very intentionally hitting a button. You bring them what they asked for, and they seem frustrated. Well, maybe they meant to hit something else. And also, you might just have someone, you know what they're going for. They obviously wanted to hit goldfish crackers, but they're one button off. Personally, I'm often one button off, only on the top row. That third category of variable skills. Before I called it a degenerative disease. What gives? Well, there's a lot of parallels with variable skills. If someone's only successful with AAC on a good day or when they're not having a meltdown, you can predict that there sometimes will be bad days. So why not build skills for those bad days? You also might have students whose parents report it always goes great at home, my kids are whiz at AAC, and then you don't see it at school. It's really easy to believe that parents are over-reporting their children's skills. Parents, of course, want to see the best in their kids, but there are so many differences in environment between home and school that it's a little bit silly to assume that they're the same. Instead of thinking the parents are wrong, whether or not they are, let's work on ways to make it work in both places. Finally, and I alluded to this earlier, meltdowns, overloads. So many students, adults, everybody is unable to use their main AAC method during a meltdown. Do they normally access with their hands, but during a meltdown they're using their hands to flap? Can't use their AAC. And the worst thing possible during that moment is to pull their hands away from their self-regulation and have them hit a small screen. So let's come up with another technique for that. We've looked at some of the reasons you might consider alternative access. Well, who are the people that use that alternative access, and why do they do that? Let's look at that. Well, this presentation is about alternative access beyond physical disabilities, and I would consider CVI a physical disability. It runs under the radar so thoroughly that I'd like to talk about it anyway. 30 to 40% of children with visual impairments have CVI, and it does not show up on a classic eye exam. Even more confusingly, CVI behaviors can mimic intellectual and developmental disability behaviors. So if someone already has an intellectual or developmental disability identified, their behaviors that come from CVI may just be attributed to their original disability. CVI frequently co-occurs with multiple disabilities, so there's a huge stream of information coming. It's hard to tease apart symptoms. Parents might even have been told that their children had a visual impairment, but been told, there's nothing you can do about it, and it got sort of buried underneath the rest of the information. And CVI is a spectrum. It can look very quote-unquote mild to being as if the child was profoundly blind. There's also anecdotal data that there's difficulty with looking and listening concurrently when you have CVI. How does that relate to alternative access? Well, not being able to see is a great reason why AAC might not be working out. And that last point, the looking and listening, you might have a student who's always looking away when you're trying to model, or just looks at the board, looks away, look at the board, looks away, and isn't selecting. If you can't look and listen at the same time, modeling is not going to be super helpful for you. You're not seeing the finger point while you're taking in the stream of information. For each of these reasons that you might use alternative access, we'll look at a little case study, and then we'll come back to it at the end and talk about what sort of AAC we might recommend for this person. This is my cousin Davida. She's 8 and has cerebral palsy. She can grab things, and so they tried PECs for a while, but she was really unsuccessful. They also tried very rudimentary eye gaze with one object held on one side of her and one held on the other. She wasn't interested, and it didn't seem to make sense to her. She makes really good eye contact and follows people around the room with her eyes, so there weren't a lot of clues that her vision wasn't very good, but we found CVI in her old medical files, and a lot of things started making sense once we realized that that might be an issue. She's received no kind of treatment for CVI. She's had a couple eye surgeries, but they've been mostly cosmetic, and none were intended to fix her vision. She doesn't need glasses. She has a consistent yes response, but no consistent no response. Okay, we'll come back to her later. There's so much to get to here, it's almost overwhelming. Dyspraxia can also be called developmental dyspraxia, developmental coordination disorder, or just motor problems. There's a significant association between ASD and developmental dyspraxia, especially difficulty involving reversal errors, hand shape errors, and amplitude errors. So if someone's trying to copy a gesture, they might do it backwards, they might use the wrong hand shape, or they might go way overshooting or way undershooting. Dyspraxia is also associated with sensory over and under responsiveness, including motor planning difficulties. So a student who has a lot of sensory issues, either very sensory seeking or very sensory avoidant, may be having dyspraxia issues. Dyspraxia is also associated with ADHD, even so-called mild ADHD. It doesn't matter how mild or spicy the ADHD is, they might still be having issues with dyspraxia. And it may even be a distinct subtype of ADHD. We're not sure. Why I'm bringing up the severe or mild ADHD is that you might have a student who has mild ADHD that hasn't been identified because their other disabilities are so much more obvious. But that mild ADHD might mean they're having dyspraxic issues that their other disabilities aren't causing. Finally, children with specific language impairment are also more likely to qualify for a developmental coordination disorder diagnosis. So basically, anybody you're seeing for speech reasons might be having issues with dyspraxia, and that can affect motor planning, which we know has a huge impact on AAC success and how quickly you learn AAC. Alrighty, this dude was a student of mine in my high school life skills classroom. He's 14. He's very clumsy, consistent gross motor difficulties, especially on his left side. It's very notable, like putting on boots. It was almost impossible on the left side. His family is using facilitated communication and teaching that with the rapid prompting method. They felt very happy with it, that it worked great for them, but we never had any success at all using these methods at school. And once ASHA put out the position statement against it, we, did not touch the book at school. He did not have an established yes or no response, and while he was pretty adept with hitting the play button on a tablet, it took him literal years to learn that one target. Other students had Proloquo to go, so we tried it a little bit, but there was absolutely no success there, and with very little family support, the school was at a loss. Remember him. We're going to come back to it later to see what recommendations we might make. A lot of the people I think would benefit from alternative access are autistic, because there's so many reasons autistic people might want to use alternative access. Many of us have difficulty using a communication device or board during a meltdown. Our hands are busy, it's too difficult for our brains, or something that was within our cognitive skills at rest is not within our cognitive skills at unrest. Some people are also verbal except during a meltdown, and so have no practice with any AAC, and then suddenly need it in one moment. I've also never heard anyone talk about this but me, but I think sensory overload from the device is significant. When I'm in a shutdown, I can't handle the bright glow from a screen, and I definitely can't handle the voice output. I used to have a student who screamed whenever we modeled or asked him to use his device. And when I realized that he was noise sensitive outside of using the device, I just tried turning the sound off, and it helped like 50% of the time. There was a recent study about letterboarding communication, the method where a partner's holding the board and the user is using their finger to point. There's been a lot of controversy about whether that counts as facilitated communication or not, because there's the possibility that the person holding the board could be moving it a little or giving subtle cues. The study found that the user's eye gaze anticipated their movement, and it was fast enough that it suggested they wouldn't be getting cues from the communication partner. Now, I'm not saying to use this method, and I would encourage you not to if you work in the schools, because it is sometimes considered facilitated communication, and there is liability as far as your ASHA license and whatnot. But what I really get out of this study isn't about the method they used, but about the possibility of using eye gaze. We know people choose facilitated communication methods because they feel like their kid can do more than they're getting out of another communication method. What if you believed that? We know that there are people with capabilities that just aren't getting met with whatever device they're using. The study is showing us that some of those people, their eyes are anticipating their movements. So what if we used eye gaze? Would that increase unaided communication? I had a little plus on that last slide, autism spectrum disorder plus. What do I mean by that? Well, developmental disorders that aren't autism still may share many traits with autism. And when someone has a rare developmental disorder or genetic disorder, it might be really poorly researched. You find 1 or 2 studies about it, maybe 10 or 20, but there are thousands about autism, and it can be helpful to use autism techniques or ideas with other disorders. All those reasons that I list that autistic people might want to use alternative access also apply to other disorders. And I want to include Down syndrome with that. Even though there's a vast body of research on Down syndrome, we also want to note that Down syndrome is associated with increased rates of ASD, or at least ASD symptoms. Additionally, preterm children show more autistic traits than the general population, and they also might be people that use AAC. So think about what I say about autism in a broader sense, not just about people with an autism diagnosis. Miss Mary Mack. Mary lived in a group home that I worked at. She had been institutionalized since literally age 1, and her only access to AAC in that whole time before I knew her was sign language. After all that time, she had 2 understandable home signs, one for coffee and one for soda, her 2 main motivators. And they weren't clear to a fluent signer. You had to know her. She liked a wet environment. She poured that coffee and soda on the floor, and we mopped multiple times a day. She also threw things like the cups for those, but also just stuff that was around, and we had concrete floors so that they were easier to mop, so things might break. It wasn't a great environment for a dedicated AAC device. She stimmed all day. She flapped her hands, she rocked her body, she moved her mouth. It was really joyful, and it was great to see her get to do that outside of an institution where she wasn't going to be punished for it. She had a consistent no response, but no consistent yes response. Save Mary in your mind, and we'll come back to her later. She died about 2 years ago from poor medical care. We had been bringing up concerns to doctors for a long time, and they were not doing adequate testing because they just didn't know what to do with her. Please make sure that you're paying attention to medical issues. They can be life-saving. So now you're reeling because you realize how many students or clients, current or prior, could be helped by alternative access. But how on earth do you do it? You don't have the money for new equipment. You don't know how to use eye gaze or switches. Maybe you're not the boss. By that I mean you are the SLP, but you don't get to control what you do. Or you're a paraprofessional, SLPA, it's your CFY, and you feel like you're not allowed to make big changes. You're a teacher, you're the OT, you're the PT. Or maybe you're not a professional at all. You're a parent or you're a user. When you feel like you don't know what to do, you're lost in the field of alternative access, how do you do it? Let's look at practical implementation. The ideal switch scanning user is already slow-paced and patient. Switch scanning can be really laborious, and it takes a long time to get the button that you want. If you're already using a program that has switch scanning as a feature, which many do, it can be really nice to use a feature that's already built in rather than pulling out a whole new communication method. On the contrary to the slow-paced impatient, it can also be fun for someone who likes hitting a button 20 times in a row, because you do hit the button a lot of times in a row. They also have to be able to stop on the right one, though. If it's hard to follow someone's gaze or attention, then eye gaze and head pointing might not work for you, so switch scanning is another option. Also, if someone has vision issues or won't look, switch scanning can have auditory feedback, so you can have auditory prompts turned on, and then as they scan over each button, the device will say it for them, and they can decide whether to choose. I want to highlight that vision issues doesn't just have to be a medical issue. It could also be someone who just isn't a visual learner or has a hard time processing their visual environment. We have this idea that autistic people and people with developmental disabilities in general do well with visuals, and that's true for so many people, but that doesn't mean it's going to be true for everybody.
You. Are. The.
In this video, you see how using the screen as a switch works in Cough Drop. I'm using one side of the screen as a stepper switch, which moves from item to item, and the other side of the screen as a chooser switch, which says, yes, that's the item I want. It would work this exact way were you using two external switches as well. The screen as a switch can be a little confusing because as I'm tapping on the left side of the screen to move, I'm also tapping on a button. I'm tapping where the word it is, but it's not choosing it. It's, being a mover. So you could delete a couple buttons so that there was a blank area to tap. You can also, on a laptop, be using the keyboard as a switch, so they could use the space bar if that's easier. I've had students who were obsessed with laptops, just always on the computer, and so even though normally I don't think of a laptop-based AAC program, it would work in that case. Proloco to Go, SnapCore, and Cough Drop all have the screen as a switch built in and take external switches. Of course, most dedicated devices also take switches, but I know that is less common these days to acquire. One switch scanning, instead of having a mover switch, simply dwells a certain amount of time on each button. It's a lot more accurate usually. People make way fewer mistakes, but it's very slow. Two-switch scanning can be really nice because you can slow down for some but not for others. For example, when I scan on two-switch scanning, I go really quickly until I get close to the one I want, and then I slow down. Students who have variable cognitive rates, sometimes they're really fast, sometimes they need a lot of processing time. Two-switch scanning might be a good option as well. Partner-assisted scanning is one of the most versatile kinds of access, in my opinion. You can use it when someone won't stay still, when their hands are always busy, if they're not looking, if they can't move. It's so versatile. Imagine trying to get someone who can't stay still and is using their hands to use a switch. It's a lot harder, although it's totally possible. There, for example, a vocal cord vibration switch would work well for that kind of person. Nevertheless, partner-assisted scanning is really accessible. You can get started with basically no materials except a book. And, you could take a piece of paper and write some words on it, and that's your communication book. Partner-assisted scanning is really nice for people with vision issues because you, as the partner, read it aloud. You can modulate the volume for them. You can go at whatever speed they need to go. Usually, how you would partner-assisted scan is you go through each item and they tell you yes or no. You can start by going item by item and move on to doing row column scanning, which is the same for any other kind of scanning. You can start item by item and move on to row column. Row column's a lot faster, so always check if that works out. In the next slide, you'll see me doing item by item scanning, so I'm just going to do a quick example of row column scanning here. For this page, I would go quick chat, I want, asking a question, I'm telling you something, and then they would say yes or no. Say they say yes, then I would go quick chat, I want, and wait for the yes or the no. If someone doesn't have an established no response, but they do have a yes or vice versa, you can go slower, and if they do nothing, then move on, and if they do something, that's the yes. But really, you'd prefer to have a yes or no response. Of course, you can start any AAC without them knowing how to use it already, and so you could start partner-assisted scanning if they don't have an established yes-no response and try to teach one, but I would start with a system. If there is a system they can use without that, then I would start there if they don't have an established yes or no.
Quick chat? No. I want? Yes. I want
To eat? No. Drink? No. Go somewhere? A person? Play. Yes, I want to play. I want to play. Swinging? No. Spinning? Yes, I want to play spinning. In this video, you see me modeling on a partner-assisted scanning book. This book has 6 icons per page, and you can see how you can get some fairly robust communication out of 6 items. One of the things I really like about partner-assisted scanning, and pod books especially, is you maintain fairly easy communication, even though there's a lot of folders to get through, because you start with that pragmatic branch. The I want something, I'm telling you something, instead of, for example, in Proloquo, going to a nouns folder or a things folder. So it can be good for people who don't have a strong working memory but still need quite big icons on the page. This book is a homemade book, and it's not not a full robust vocabulary. We just didn't have access to that. But pod books are amazing. They have full robust vocabularies, even with very large icon sizes. And if you have access to the pod templates, that's great. If you don't, an emergency book like this can be great for meltdowns. You know, if there are only some situations in which you need to do partner-assisted scanning, a homemade book is fine, as long as there's the option in there, get my more complicated AAC. You can also use a core board with some common fringe words and partner scan that. That can be nice if someone's already using, say, Proloquo, and you make a board of their homepage that they can scan. You can also scan an alternative pencil. An alternative pencil is basically a way to write out the alphabet so it's easy to scan. And that's a way for people to write who have a hard time with that. I think alternative pencils can be nice even for people who don't scan otherwise, because it limits your options. You're not looking at all 26 letters of the alphabet at once. Also, think about your yes and no methods. They might have an established yes or no that doesn't look like a nod or head shake. My cousin, who I'm modeling for in this video, has a yes that doesn't quite look like a nod, but once you know her, you're quite certain of what's yes and what's no. If they will push away the book for a no, totally fine. Think about what yes and no looks like. It could be turn your head to the right for yes and to the left for no. Whatever works. Eye gaze is good for the person whose hands might be busy, but they still will sit or stand still. It must be easy to read where their eyes are pointing. You don't want to be guessing. If they obviously have focused visual attention on things, that's a good sign that eye gaze might be useful. You see that they're always looking at what they're thinking about. Eye gaze can also be nice if the person would benefit from very large symbols or letters, because eye gaze is more commonly on great big boards that are fairly robust, they're solid. And you can even put things as big as a whole wall of the classroom, have one icon on each corner poster sized. It's really nice.
What do you want to do? Feelings? No. Want? Go. Park. Are you done? Okay, you want to go to the park.
Okay, so that video is a little silly because I'm holding my own board, which is not very common. There's a fairly small gap to see my eyes through, and also there's no yes or no on the board. What's that about? Well, that can actually be a great space saver. If someone's able to do yes and no signals by themselves without the board, that gives you 2 more spots. You might not be able to see in this video, but I have one side of the paper saying I don't know and the other side saying something else. So I always think there should be 4 answers to a yes or no question. Yes, no, I don't know, something else. So 2 of those are taken care of by me nodding or shaking my head. High-tech eye gaze is expensive and hard to get access to unless you can really justify the need for it. Low-tech is way easier. You can cut out the middle of a piece of paper like this. You can have a great big sheet of plastic, or I'm not coming up with the word for it. But the clear stuff with icons, and that also makes it easier to see the face if someone's not going to hold their face perfectly in the middle like I will for a video. Eye gaze can be more complex by using color coding. You saw on the slide before this that there was the alphabet in each corner, or 3 letters in each corner, and then if they looked at it, maybe the letter they wanted was in red, and then they would look towards the red corner. So it was 2 looks for each letter. But there wasn't 26 letters around the edges. There were only 6 places to look. Helpful. You can try changing the size. What about using 1 symbol on each side of the room? That'd be really cool, and it could be helpful in a meltdown. Like, all they have to do is point their entire body the correct direction. That's not eye gaze, but it's related. It is more similar to head pointing, which we will talk about next.
I was thinking of plexiglass. I was thinking of plexiglass.
This is COVID speak. I am obsessed with this. It comes from Cough Drop, or the members of Cough Drop's team anyway, and it's a video conferencing option for using either eye gaze or clicking on the screen to communicate. It's so cool, and I really encourage you to go watch the presentation on it, because I am definitely going to. But I think it's a really great option, not just for patients who are intubated, but for anybody using eye gaze. It's really clear to see where the eyes are pointing on the screen. They get to see themselves pointing, which is huge. Just an awesome tool, and you can customize the grid around it, so it can be really whatever kind of eye gaze you want. Head pointing has a lot of the same applications and reasons to use it as eye gaze. Your hands are busy, they'll still sit or stand still, there has to be a stand or a mount like eye gaze, or they'll hold their own device. Same for eye gaze, but it's a little harder to frame your face in it for eye gaze as it is for head pointing. Head pointing is also a great choice if you are already using or plan on using TouchChat. Because TouchChat has head pointing built in on newer iPads and iPhones, but most people don't get iPhones for their primary device.
Starting with the iPhone 10. Starting with the iPhone 10.
I am going.
You see in this video me using TouchChat for head pointing. I want to give you a heads up, no pun intended, that there is a bug in TouchChat regarding head pointing right now, in which sometimes the button just won't select. I've contacted them. It's a known issue. They're working on it, but it's a real bummer. Head pointing can be used the same way as eye gaze for low tech, and it can be easier than someone keeping their head completely still and moving their eyes. High tech, try out different selection signals. I am using the dwell time in this video, so just the longer I stay on the button, then the bar fills up and it selects. But you can look at a button and select by sticking out your tongue, blinking. You can almost turn it into a game, and that can be a really great tool for buy-in. I practiced so much more on TouchChat using the sticking your tongue out one, because that's a stim for me. It was really silly. You could also use a laser pointer mounted on the head to point at a low-tech board. It's well represented in media. It's dangerous. You know you can't point a laser pointer in someone's eye. And if you make the laser pointer low-powered enough to not be dangerous, it can't be seen very well in a well-lit classroom. But it's always an option. I wanted to bring it up.
Have questions?
Can you
Have questions? I do, actually. What perspective does the disability experience lend real questions? Okay, let's do this. Do I handle bathroom stuff? Does your dude stuff work? Is my voice good to speak for you? I can go lower. Are you like Rain Man? Do you count cards? Should we go to Vegas? Okay, you're a liar. That's good to know.
When we talk about partner-interpreted signals, we have to talk about ethics. It really bothers me when people talk about ethics for something like facilitated communication and then don't talk about it for partner-assisted scanning. Any type of communication where the partner is interpreting your input has ethical concerns. In eye gaze, you're the one saying, oh, I think their eyes are looking here. Same with head pointing if it's low tech. Same with partner-assisted scanning. That doesn't mean you don't do it. What it means is that there should never be only one person who understands the signals. If you can tell whether the person's doing a yes or no, but no one else can, that is a problem. You also need to be very careful about putting words in their mouth. If they nod on want something and you thought they were going to do quick chat, you don't go, oh, I'm not sure, let's try again. You go into want something. The least ambiguous signal possible should be used. If they yes by twitching one hand and no by twitching it differently, that is not going to work. Working on a big nod and a big head shake is a great goal, and it helps outside of scanning communication, which I really like. There's some good teaching tools for teaching yes and no. One of the ones I like the most is putting a button or a switch underneath the chin that says yes and one to the left or right of the head that says no. So when they turn their head or nod it, they get the immediate auditory input. Finally, always have an I have something to say signal. Don't just pull out the book or the board when you think they need it. They need some way of signaling I have something to say. That can be raising their hand, that can be grunting, whatever. And even if they don't say that, check in. Do you want your book right now? And listen to the answer. We don't want to be forcing communication. We don't want to be not pulling it out because it's inconvenient or we're in the middle of a lesson. We're almost to the end. One final thing. If you're noticing any of these traits I listed that makes you want to try alternative access, don't go full steam ahead. Wait 1 second and check for these things. First things first, you want to make sure you have a vision and hearing test. You need to find out whether they've had a test, and if they haven't, they need to go get one. It can be hard sometimes to find someone who will test someone who's developmentally disabled because they might not be able to raise their hand when they hear the tone or say, this one or that one for glasses. But it's completely possible to test those people. Think about it. You've seen babies in glasses. There must be something they can do. And if they do have vision and hearing tests, make sure that they've been properly corrected for. Are they wearing their glasses at the right time? You may find glasses in the backpack halfway through the year and be like, what? They were supposed to be wearing this? Are their FM systems working? Are their hearing aids on? Secondly, check out using a key guard. That can help people who are accidentally activating the wrong buttons. Key guards help me when I am one button off all the time. You can also have a pair of gloves that you've cut just one finger out of. So that's the finger that touches, and then the glove prevents the rest of the hand from activating the screen. Thirdly, a lot of the sensory issues I've mentioned before may be a moot point if you have good sensory diet going. PT and OT are also going to be able to help with some of that stuff. Think about their sensory needs, not just with the sensory diet, but with the device itself. Is it too heavy or too light? Is it too loud or too quiet? And are they able to stim while they're holding it? If they're having to carry it around all the time and they want to be using their hands to stim, that's a big deterrent, and just a carry strap might solve a huge problem. Okay, we're moving on to our case studies. We're going to look at each of these and think about what AAC options we might offer. Please write in the Slack.
Scott. Can you read answers off, please? Scott, can you read answers off, please? Thanks. Thanks.
Yeah.
What do you think about Davida? What do you think about Davida?
Yeah. Auditory plus visual PAS? Question?
Yes. We use mostly auditory partner scanning. Yes, we use mostly auditory partner scanning.
And Brianna Hughes said, agree with auditory and visual partner scanning using her yes signal.
Where? Working on a no
Here's
signal.
another
We're
one.
working on a no signal.
Here's another one from Brianna. It says, maybe exploring grabbing a stylus for direct selection since you can grab things.
Yes. She's not very accurate, though.
Couple more. Got one that says all assistive devices help a person be their best. And then another one that says thinking of keeping visual channel options open, especially because CVI should be resolving with appropriate input.
Yes. We keep giving visual input, even though she mostly wants to hear Yes, we keep giving visual input even though she mostly wants to hear.
Perfect. That's it on this one.
What do you think about him? What do you think about him?
That was a tough one.
I want to add that he loves computers. I want to add that he loves computers.
Nice. There's a couple couple comments. Switch scanning possible with practice or eye gaze. And another one that says EMC, which I actually don't know what that is. Another one that says eye pointing to targets.
Every move counts. Every move counts.
Yeah, that is a good one. Every move counts in preferences or in preference assessment.
My street. My first. Though. Thought. Was. Switch scanning. My first thought was switch scanning. But I do like the idea of eye gaze. My first thought was switch scanning, but I do like the idea of eye gaze. And partner-assisted scanning. Since he's used to communicating with partner input. My first thought was switch scanning, but I do like the idea of eye gaze and partner-assisted scanning since he's used to communicating with partner input. Anyone. Those are good thoughts in the SLSCK Slack. What do you think about Mary? What do you think about Mary?
I'm going to read these. I'm going to read this off for people with some vision issues. Mary has institutionalized from infancy access to AAC with sign language to understandable home signs, a wet environment through things, in which she talked about this earlier, but stems with hands and body, all waking hours, and consistent no response. Let's see if we've got some input yet. People are typing.
Did.
All right, so Donnie says, if she was able to give consistent no response, partner assisted scanning, where she indicates no for things she doesn't want. Wet environment plus stimming could mean, or probably no switches or high tech if it's wet environment a lot. And EMC would be good to determine more information about her preferences and abilities. Another one is step scanning for no, stopping for yes. There's a lot of good ones here.
Partner assisted scanning. We did 20 questions. Type partner assisted scanning. We tried low tech boards, but she used her hands so much. We tried low tech boards, but she used her hands so much. Thanks.
Yeah. And it looks like this session, the time is up.
Thanks everybody.
But that was pretty amazing. And if you guys still continue to have questions, I'm sure Lily will be happy to go through Slack and continue to answer them as you have them. And plus you can email her there, lily.huston@gmail.com. So we appreciate your time, Lily. That was great. And thanks everybody else for